You know, we found a clip. This is you actually interviewing your father several years ago. Let's take a look at this.
I remember driving home with you to Nacum a number of times and talking the whole time because you'd never stop asking questions.
Yeah, well, hasn't changed much. I think I remember mostly when I was a little kid reading with you.
Oh, yeah. Yeah. Well, that was great. That was so much fun.
I thought so.
I can see how moved you are, Jordan, understandably. Obviously,
Piers, you always make me cry when you.
you know, I knew you might get emotional about this. I wanted to leave it to the end.
Hi everyone, welcome back to the channel. If you are meeting me for the first time, my name is Clevy and it is so nice to meet you. Let's dive right into this one.
Just written a whole book about the Bible, about God, about all of this. When I finished it, I couldn't work out whether you actually believe in God, whether you think there is, personally think there is, for example, a heaven. You've obviously had to give this, through the death of your parents, a lot of thought, I would imagine. What is the reality? I mean, do you believe there is do you believe in God? Do you think there is a heaven? Is that where you think they've gone to?
You know, Piers, I would say that I leave the things that are beyond my comprehension outside the realm of my comprehension, and I try to understand what I can understand. I certainly believe that we can produce hell on earth, and we have in many ways. I've certainly had experiences that indicated to me that the reestablishment of the Garden of Eden on earth is a possibility, and that you can live like that. How those things are related to what's eternal is beyond me. I think like it's beyond everyone. And I believe that with sufficient faith that you walk with God through the valley of the shadow of death. I think that's true. I think that if you're courageous and you confront the worst life has to offer, that the spirit of your ancestors walks with you. What that means in the final analysis with regards to the relationship between the finite and the eternal, I don't know. I don't know. I can feel eternity touching the mundane life in the confines of my own life, and I try to make that welcome, and that works. Everything else that I think I've written or spoken about, and there's nothing hidden. You know, I'm trying to take people along my own explorations and discovery and sharing what I've come to understand. I can tell you with regards to studying the biblical texts that the more I study them, the more they reveal. That seems inexhaustible, and it's been unbelievably useful. Like writing this book was ridiculously useful. I learned so much. I'm still adjusting to the things that I've learned. And I certainly do believe as well that it's by no means chance that the most functional societies in the world are predicated upon the biblical text. That's not. That there's a direct causal relationship there.
Did writing the book,
not least because the
just on that.
Go ahead.
Did the book give you a greater sense of faith? I mean, did it make you in a way more religious as you read more and more and dissected text after text after text?
Yeah, well, I do believe, like I said, I do believe that, and I think all the clinical evidence points to this. The more forthrightly you confront the challenges of life, the more powerful the spirit that abides with you. And I think you can make a very strong biological case for that. The biological case is, well, obviously, you're going to make what's within you more manifest psychophysiologically in precise proportion to your willingness to voluntarily take on the burdens of life. Like, obviously. If you shrink away from things, you're not going to adapt and adjust to them. And so if you confront them with faith and hope, then why wouldn't that put you in a position where the best of you is brought to bear on the challenges of the situation? And why wouldn't that be identical to the spirit of the most profound spirit of your illustrious ancestors? I can't see how that cannot be true. And, you know, what's the relationship between the core of the human spirit and the nature of reality itself? Well, there's some relationship, obviously. What's that relationship in its totality? Well, I don't think that's not within, what would you say? That's not within the realm of the graspable, but we can make approximations to it.
Christianity Today reviewed your book and said, Christian readers should learn from Peterson's boldness, his disposition of awe, and docility before the sacred page. However, the question of God is unavoidable. Peterson is slippery on this point. Familiar words from Christian doctrine like creation and redemption and resurrection mean something altogether different when Peterson uses them. They're kind of suggesting that you go right to the point of saying you believe in God and that you're a fully paid up God believer, if you like, for want of a better phrase, but you don't quite cross that line. Is that where you are? I mean, if you say you've had a sort of...
Well, no, I don't think so. I think the first thing I would say is that, no, there's a continual insistence in the biblical text that God is outside of understanding, outside of our understanding, right? So whatever God is beyond the categories, even of real and unreal. And that's not my interpretation of the text. I mean, even Moses only gets a glimpse of God's back. And so we have to always remember that we're talking about something that in the final analysis we don't understand. But then I would also say, I don't believe that belief means what most people think when they say belief. For me, religious belief isn't propositional, it's existential. And, you know, we talked about the great adventure, let's say, that Trump and his weird team of X-Men and Avengers are embarking upon. And I would say their faith is manifest in the pattern of their action and not in what they say. And I think that religious faith in the most fundamental sense is the willingness to hoist your cross joyfully as you trudge uphill. And that's not the same thing as declaiming about what you assume propositionally to be true. And, you know, Christ in the Gospels says, not all those who say, Lord, Lord, will enter the kingdom of heaven. It's like belief is a very complicated issue. And I think the best way that you infer your knowledge about someone's belief is watching how they conduct themselves, not what they say. The Pharisees in the gospel text proclaim their belief constantly, but they're the ones who crucify Christ. And that's something to think about.
You got into this with Richard Dawkins. It was a fascinating exchange. I want to just play a little mashup from that encounter.
You either believe that the world of truth is unified in the final analysis, or you don't.
The facts that I care about are the facts that are true and have evidence. Did they exist or did they not exist?
Well, I'm speaking allegorically there within the confines of the text.
What makes you think the writers of Genesis were a great writer? I mean, who were they? We know nothing about them.
I think that there's a spirit of literary genius at work across millennia, crafting that story so that it has almost an infinite depth.
The truth of science is the truth that gets us to the moon.
And I don't think it makes any difference.
It doesn't make a difference whether it was divinely inspired or whether it evolved.
Truth is unified. And what that's going to mean eventually is that the world of value and the world of fact coincide in some manner that we don't yet understand.
You've analogized the dragon fight to
well, how many dragons have
Satan.
you overcome in your life?
I'm not interested in dragons. I'm interested in reality. I think, Dr. Peterson, you're drunk on symbols.
Yes, you mentioned. I've heard that comment.
It was really interesting. I've interviewed Richard Dawkins several times, and I always say to him, you know, it's interesting. I said, because you cannot explain to me, Richard Dawkins, for example, what was there before nothing? You know, what was there before nothing? Because the human brain can't comprehend what that even means, there has to be a superior power to a human being out there somewhere that can make sense of all that. And that's why, look, I believe in God. I was raised as a Catholic. But the Catholic Herald said of your debate there was no meeting of minds. They were forced to agree their minds were differently constructed. There was no merging of reality. And it seems to me probably if you have me, you and Dawkins in the same room, you've got the three components there. You've got one person, me, who's an absolute unequivocal believer. You've got you that I suspect is nudging that way, but it's not quite there. in the way that I am, and you've got Dawkins, who's completely implacably opposed to any sense that they could possibly be anything other than what's staring him in front of his eyes. Would that be fair?
Well, I'd say a couple of things about that. The first is that even the scientific accounts for materialist reality require one miracle to get going. For example, it's a truism among cosmologists that the laws of time and space, the laws of science, break down at the singularity. And there's no difference between saying that and saying something that we can't explain from within the confines of our materialist understanding emerged at the origin to bring all things into being. There's a miracle lurking in there somewhere. And of course, the biologists are also stuck with the problem of the origin of life, which they hand wave about constantly, but have been completely unable to account for. And so my friend Jonathan Pajot, you know, his insistence is that if he's going to accept a miracle, he'll accept the miracle that proclaims that the cosmos itself is founded on sacrifice. And that's a completely different framework of conceptualization that I unpack to a large degree in my book, because you can make a very strong case that perception itself is a sacrificial endeavor. And so Dawkins' metaphysics is very narrowly empirical and very narrowly Enlightenment. And part of the problem with that is that there are also just things that Dawkins doesn't know. And I would say in his favor and in the favor of our discussion is that near the end of that discussion, we did have a meeting of minds, because we started to talk about how the evolution of narrative in the manner that he represented as memes could have a long-term effect on the genetic evolution of humanity. And he got very excited about that. And I was thrilled about that, because one of the reasons I wanted to talk to Dawkins is because I think some of his ideas, especially the idea of meme, has far more significance than he thinks it does.
Right.
Now, part of the problem is there's a whole literature that Richard Dawkins knows nothing about. So, for example, he doesn't know anything about the work of a man named Mircea Eliade, who's was the preeminent historian of religion for years. He's out of favor in academia because he's not a postmodern, hedonistic, power-mad nihilist. And, you know, Eliade was one of those people who thinks that there was something fundamental about the structure of mythology and narrative. And Dawkins doesn't know anything about that entire field of endeavor. And that's a major problem, given that he's also very concerned with the evolution of our ability to abstract. And I was trying to move the discussion in that direction, and that happened very successfully near the end of it.
Where do I even start from to talk about it? Let me just say this, because this interview allows that. I heard about Dr. Peterson 7 years ago from my boyfriend, and I listened to one of his recorded lectures and I was hooked. This man, if it weren't for him, like, I'm not even sure that I would have made it from the dark place that I was when I was going through difficulties. No. If you, if you've been there, you would understand what I'm talking about. And this man, I might never meet him one day in the future. You might not even hear or see this video, you know, but this interview allows it. Just because I love this. Piers, thank you. For someone who has been watching a lot of interviews, it's quite refreshing to see this, the mutual respect they have for each other, and the fact that all of the questions he asked were really, really, strategic and very thoughtful. Those questions were able to tie, Dr. Peterson's personal life and work, and allowed room for him to speak. And not just that, but also going further and even showing his vulnerability. That's a man. That's my icon. I love this interview. Brought me to tears, like just watching the part where, he was talking about his father. My deepest condolences, and I pray that May God help you during this time. Sending so much love to him and his family. My deepest condolences to them. I honestly loved this interview. This is, see, whenever I see Pierce's interview, you know, I just want to say thanks for sticking to core essential values of journalism. You guys know that every single time I come here and I'm always shouting and joking about how, journalists, hosts, they are doing something terrible. They are doing something terrible. You come, you invite someone, and you don't even allow them to speak. So you only called me so you could hear yourself. Like, I want to understand that. I just want to say thank you, Mr. Morgan, for, sticking to the core values of journalism, objective and with integrity. That is so admirable in today's world. Let me just end this with this question he asked, and let's dwell on that for a little while. Though I don't want this to go over 20 minutes, right? So he asked him. He said, I am sure that with the death of his parent, he's had, time to think about, the realities of heaven and hell. And, what do you think about it? How, and I love how Peterson approaches each questions with curiosity and just being open-minded, right? And Piers asks the questions that most of us would always want to ask. Do you believe in God? Do you think there is God? And he's like, if there are things that I cannot explain, I will attribute it. That there must be some greater power out there. And it's nice. I think at some point, all of us were in such places. We're in such places where you're like, the things I cannot explain. But it's heading towards there. From this conversation, my man is heading towards there. Very soon, in the next 2 years, 1 year, next year even, if we ask them this question, I bet the answer will be different. I did enjoy this interview, and I hope you all did too. Do have an amazing day.